The divorce papers arrived slipped under the bathroom door while I was still brushing my teeth. I remember staring at them on the cold tile floor, toothpaste still foaming at the corner of my mouth, and reading the words that would hollow me out completely. Irreconcilable Tuesday morning differences. That was what Marcus called it. Irreconcilable differences. But that wasn't what he said to my face. No. To my face, my husband of 6 years looked me dead in the eyes and said something. I will never, not for as long as I draw breath, forget. He said, Clara, I just can't do this anymore. You've let yourself go. You're not the woman I married. You're not attractive to me anymore. Before we go any further into this story, I want to pause and ask, where are you watching from right now? Drop your city, your country, your little corner of the world in the comments below. We have people joining us from everywhere, and I love knowing who's here with us. And if you're new to this channel, welcome to Voice and Tales. Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because we tell stories here that will shake something loose inside of you. Stories like this one. Now, back to Clara. Clara Mendez was not a supermodel. She knew that. She had always known that. She was the daughter of a seamstress and a high school janitor who grew up in a 2-bedroom apartment in Newark, New Jersey, where the radiator knocked all winter and the hallway always smelled like someone else's dinner. She was the kind of girl who read books under the covers with a flashlight, who wore her older sister's hand-me-down clothes, and learned early that beauty, at least the kind that costs money, was not something her family could afford. But Clara had something else. She had presence. She had eyes the color of dark amber that caught light in a way that made strangers pause. She had a laugh that filled a room. She had intelligence so sharp it could cut glass. And she had a warmth, an openness that made people feel, within minutes of meeting her, that she was the most important person they had ever spoken to. She was 23 when she met Marcus Hale. Marcus was the kind of man who walked into a room and immediately made you feel like the room had been waiting for. Him, tall, polished, the son of a Connecticut real estate family with old money and newer ambitions. He was finishing his MBA when they met at a mutual friends gallery opening in Brooklyn. Clara in a thrifted green dress she had altered herself. Marcus in a blazer that probably cost more than her monthly rent. He had crossed the room to talk to her. Her, not the model standing near the bar. Not the socialite in diamonds. Her. You have the most interesting face I've ever seen, he told her. And she had laughed, that big, room-filling laugh, and said, Is that a compliment or a diagnosis? He fell in love with her that night. Or at least she believed he did. They dated for 2 years. Married in a small ceremony in the Catskills. 30 guests, fairy lights in the trees, Clara in a dress she designed and sewed herself. His mother had smiled tightly and said, Clara looked charming. His friends had been kind but slightly distant, the way people are when they don't quite understand a choice but are too polite to question it openly. For a while it was beautiful. Clara worked as a junior buyer for a mid-size fashion company in Manhattan. It wasn't glamorous, but she was good at it. Instinctively good. The kind of good that comes from a lifetime of studying clothes not as luxury, but as language. Marcus climbed the corporate ladder at his father's firm. They had a 1-bedroom apartment in Hoboken with a view of the skyline. They cooked dinner on Sunday nights. They argued about small things, dishes, schedules, whose turn it was to call the landlord, normal things, married things. But somewhere around year 3, something shifted. It was subtle at first. The way Marcus would glance at other women when they walked together. Not the casual, harmless noticing that all humans do, but something longer, something comparative, something that ended with his eyes coming back to her with a flicker of something she couldn't name. Disappointment, maybe, reassessment. He started making comments, small ones, easy to dismiss. You should try that gym Sarah's been going to. She looks incredible. Didn't you used to wear your hair differently? It was nicer. Is that what you're wearing tonight? Clara told herself it was stress. His father had just handed him a major account. The pressure was immense. People say things they don't mean when they're drowning. She told herself that. She kept telling herself that. Meanwhile, she began to disappear. Not physically, but the woman who had laughed her way across a gallery room, the woman who altered thrifted dresses and wore them like armor, the woman with amber eyes that caught the light. She started to go quiet. She stopped wearing the bold colors she loved. She stopped laughing as loudly. She started standing in front of mirrors for long, terrible minutes. trying to see herself the way Marcus seemed to see her, trying to identify what had changed, what was wrong, what needed to be fixed. She lost herself looking for what he was looking for. By year 5, Clara was a ghost of the woman who had walked into that gallery. She had gained some weight. Not much, not dramatically, but enough for Marcus to notice and remark upon. The stress of a difficult period at work, a miscarriage they never fully grieved, the loneliness of a marriage slowly turning cold. It had settled on her body the way grief does, quietly, visibly, only to those who were already looking for evidence. Marcus was always looking for evidence. He started working late, then weekends. Then there were dinners she wasn't invited to, client events that had no record on the shared calendar. Clara noticed. Of course she noticed. But she was so busy trying to hold herself together, trying to be enough, that she didn't confront it. She was afraid. Afraid of what she'd find, afraid of what it would mean, afraid that if she pulled that thread, everything she had spent 6 years building would unravel in her hands. She found out about the other woman on a Thursday afternoon. She hadn't been snooping. She had picked up Marcus's phone to check the time because her own phone was charging in the other room. And there it was, a text, just sitting there like a grenade with the pin already pulled. Last night was perfect. She has no idea, does she? You're too good for someone like her anyway. The name at the top of the conversation was Daniela. The contact photo was a woman Clara vaguely recognized. Younger, glossy, the kind of effortlessly beautiful that Manhattan produces in abundance. The kind of woman Marcus's mother had probably always imagined for him. Clara put the phone down. She walked to the kitchen. She turned on the faucet and stood there with the water running cold over her hands for a very long time. She didn't cry, not then. She was too deep in shock for tears. Marcus didn't come home until after midnight. He was surprised to find her awake, sitting at the kitchen table in the dark with a glass of water she hadn't touched. "We need to talk," she said. He knew immediately. She could see it in his face, the slight collapse, the flicker of guilt before it hardened into something defensive, something practiced. What followed was not the conversation she had imagined. There was no begging, no remorse, no breaking down and confessing and swearing it was a mistake. Instead, Marcus sat down across from her and, with a calmness that was more devastating than any rage could have been, told her the truth. Not the whole truth, his version of the truth. He told her that he had been unhappy for a long time, that he had tried, that Clara had changed, had become someone he didn't recognize, someone who had let herself go, someone who no longer inspired him, attracted him, made him proud to walk into a room. He said he still cared about her, in the way you care about someone you've spent years with, but that he was no longer in love with her, that what he felt for Daniela was what love was supposed to feel like. Effortless, electric, exciting. And then he said the sentence that would become the foundation of everything that came after. He said, "Clara, be honest with yourself. You're not the woman I thought you were. You never really fit into my world, and you know it." She looked at him for a long moment, and then finally she cried. The divorce was finalized 4 months later. Clara got to keep very little. The apartment was in his name. The savings account they'd shared was jointly held. But Marcus's lawyers were better than the single exhausted public interest attorney she'd managed to retain. She walked out of that marriage with her clothes, her sewing machine, her books, and a settlement that covered 3 months of rent in a studio apartment in a part of Newark she'd fought her whole childhood to escape. She moved in on a Friday in November, when the sky was the color of old concrete, and the radiator knocked exactly the way the one in her childhood home had. She sat on the floor of that empty apartment, no furniture yet, just her suitcase and her sewing machine in its case, and she allowed herself 1 hour, 60 minutes to fall completely apart, to sob until her chest ached, to feel the full weight of everything she had lost. The marriage, the life, the version of herself. She'd slowly surrendered over 6 years trying to be what someone else needed. 1 hour, and then she wiped her face. She stood up. She walked to the window and looked out at the gray Newark sky, and something happened in that moment that she would later struggle to describe in words. It wasn't rage exactly. It was quieter than rage. It was clarity, the kind that only comes when everything false has been stripped away and all that remains is the irreducible truth of who you are. She knew who she was. Marcus had made her forget, but she knew. She unzipped her sewing machine case and set it on the floor. She didn't even have a table yet. She sat cross-legged beside it and she started to sketch. On the back of a moving receipt, with a half-dried pen. The first design she had allowed herself to dream in years. She sketched until 2 a.m. She didn't even notice the time passing. What happened next did not happen overnight. This is not that kind of story. There was no magic moment, no fairy godmother, no sudden reversal of fortune that arrived like a gift. What happened next happened the way real transformation always does. Slowly, painfully through work, so relentless and unglamorous that most people would have quit inside the first month. Clara reached out to every contact she still had in fashion. Most of them were polite. Several never responded. 2 were actively discouraging. 1 former colleague. In a coffee meeting, Clara would later describe as one of the most humiliating hours of her life, told her gently that she was probably better suited to the buying side, and that independent design was a very competitive space for someone starting from scratch at her level. She went home and kept sewing. She started selling pieces on a small online shop. Custom alterations at first, then original designs. She photographed them herself, on a white bedsheet pinned to her apartment wall, in natural light from the single east-facing window. The first month she made $200. The second month, $350. She ate a lot of rice and canned beans, and told herself it was temporary. Slowly the orders started coming. Not because of advertising, not because of connections or inherited wealth or the right last name, but because Clara Mendez designed clothes the way she had always understood clothes, as language, as armor, as the thing a woman puts on when she needs the world to see exactly who she is. Her pieces had something rare. They made women feel themselves. Every seam, every cut, every choice of fabric was made by someone who had spent years being made to feel invisible and had decided, finally, to become impossible to ignore. A stylist in Brooklyn bought a coat from her online shop and wore it to a party. 3 people asked about it. 2 of them were photographers. One of those photographers worked freelance for a mid-size fashion magazine and passed Clara's shop link to the magazine's style editor with a note that said simply, "This woman is doing something different. You should look." The style editor looked, and that was the beginning of the end of Clara's invisibility. The feature came out 14 months after she had sat on the floor of that empty Newark apartment with a pen and a moving receipt. 4 pages, one of which was a full-page photograph. Clara, standing in one of her own designs, a structured burgundy coat with a silhouette that had no business, looking as powerful as it did, her dark amber, eyes level with the camera, her expression carrying something the photographer would later say he'd never quite captured in a subject before. He called it the look of someone who has already survived the worst thing and knows it. The feature went quietly viral in fashion circles, and then less quietly, and then a name appeared in Clara's email inbox that made her set down her coffee cup very slowly and stare at her screen for a full 30 seconds before she could make herself believe it was real. The email was from the fashion director at Vogue. She was in the middle of reading it for the 3rd time, hands trembling slightly, breath short, when her phone rang. "Unknown number, New York area code," she answered. "Ms. Mendez?" The voice was clipped, professional, with the particular brand of confidence that only comes from working in a building where legends are made on a daily basis. "This is Gwen Park, fashion director at Vogue. I'll be brief, we'd like to discuss a cover feature. Are you available to come in Thursday?" Clara pressed her hand flat against the wall beside her sewing machine. She closed her eyes. And then, in a voice so steady it surprised even her, she said, "I'll be there." She hung up. The apartment was completely silent. And then Clara Mendez did something she hadn't done in a very long time. She laughed. That big room-filling laugh. The one that had crossed a gallery in Brooklyn and stopped a man in his tracks. She didn't know it yet. But Marcus Hale was about to see that laugh again. On newsstands, in airports, on a glossy, impossible cover that would stop him cold in the middle of his morning routine and reach through the years and the silence and the cruelty and remind him, with devastating precision, of exactly what he had thrown away, and exactly who Clara Mendez had always been. What happens when Marcus finally sees that cover? What does Clara do when their worlds collide again? And trust me, they will collide. And what secret about that Vogue shoot is Clara still carrying that no one knows? The Vogue offices were exactly what Clara had imagined, and nothing like what she had expected. She had imagined the glamour, and yes, it was there. The soaring ceilings, the racks of clothes that cost more than cars, the beautiful people moving through corridors, with the purposeful urgency of people who know that what they do matters. But what she hadn't expected was the silence underneath all of it. The focused, almost reverent quiet of a place where art is taken seriously, where what you make is everything, and who you know is only the door. The work is what keeps you in the room. Gwen Park was a small woman with silver-streaked hair and eyes that processed everything, in a single sweep. She shook Clara's hand once, firmly, and then got straight to the point. "I've been doing this for 22 years, Gwen said, sliding Clara's lookbook across the table. "I've seen 1,000 designers who can sew, maybe 100 who understand construction, maybe 20 who understand women." She tapped the lookbook with one finger. "You're in that last group. That's rare. And rare is the only thing that belongs on a cover." Clara sat very still and let those words land. She had waited 6 years to be seen clearly by someone. It took her breath away how different it felt from being seen by Marcus, who had looked at her and found her lacking. Gwen looked at her and found something worth putting in front of the entire world. "We're thinking the October issue," Gwen continued. "Our most read issue of the year. We'd feature 3 of your original pieces. A profile, and we want you in the cover shot. Not a model. You." Clara blinked. "Me? You," Gwen said simply. "The story isn't just the clothes, Clara. The story is you. A self-taught designer from Newark who built something extraordinary out of nothing. That's the story women need right now." She paused. "That's the story I needed 22 years ago and couldn't find anywhere." She closed the lookbook. "So, are you in?" Clara thought about the floor of that empty apartment. The moving receipt. The canned beans. The colleague who told her she wasn't cut out for design. The husband who told her she wasn't enough. "Yes," she said. "I'm in." The shoot took place over 2 days in a Tribeca studio, the size of a small aircraft hangar. Clara wore her own designs. Of course she did. The stylist had offered to pull pieces from other houses, and Clara had smiled politely and declined. These were her clothes, her words, her armor. The photographer was a legend in the industry, a quietly intense Frenchman named Edouard who spoke mostly in gestures, and whose silence on set was a form of communication that everyone around him had learned to read fluently. He didn't speak much to Clara either. But on the second day, near the end of the shoot, as she stood in front of his lens wearing a floor-length ivory gown she had been sewing in her head for 3 years, structured shoulders, a neckline that was somehow both powerful and tender, the fabric moving like water, he lowered his camera. He looked at her. Not through the lens. At her. "You have been waiting a long time to be seen," he said. "Not a question." Clara held his gaze. "Yes." He nodded once, slowly. "Raise the camera again, then be seen," he said. The shot he captured in the next 4 minutes would become one of the most shared images in the magazine's digital history that year. Clara, center frame, in ivory, her dark amber eyes, carrying every year of every hard thing directly into the camera. Not with defiance exactly, but with something more complete than defiance, with arrival. The look of a woman who had walked through fire and come out the other side not burned but forged. The cover line read simply, "Clara Mendez, made from scratch." The issue hit newsstands on a Friday morning in late September. By Friday afternoon, Clara's online shop had crashed from traffic. By Saturday, her name was trending. By Sunday, her phone had received calls from 3 major fashion houses, 2 documentary producers, a literary agent who wanted to discuss a memoir, and a morning talk show booker who opened with, "We've been trying to reach you since yesterday. We'd love to have you on Tuesday if you're available." She sat in the middle of all of it, in her Newark studio, which was still the same apartment but no longer empty, now filled with fabric, bolts and dress forms and the organized, beautiful chaos of someone in the middle of creating, and she felt something she wanted to be careful with. Not pride, not triumph, gratitude, deep, quiet, almost painful gratitude. For the floor, for the moving receipt, for the canned beans, and the knocked radiator and every door that had been closed in her face. Because without all of it, she never would have made what she made. And what she made was real, bone-deep real, precisely because it had cost her everything. She was thinking this when her sister called. "Clara." Her sister's voice was strange, tight. "Have you seen your phone?" "I've been ignoring most of it," Clara said. "It's a lot." "I know, but there's something you need to see." A pause. "Someone sent me a screenshot." "Of Marcus." Clara went still. She hadn't spoken Marcus Hale's name aloud in 14 months. She hadn't allowed herself to wonder about him. Search for him, check his social media. That door, she had decided, was sealed. What about him? She said carefully. He posted about the Vogue cover, her sister said. Publicly, on his Instagram. She exhaled. You need to read it yourself. I'm sending you the screenshot now. Clara looked at her phone. The screenshot loaded. Marcus's Instagram. A photo of her Vogue cover. Someone had photographed the magazine at a newsstand. Slightly angled, the ivory gown catching the morning light. And beneath it a caption. She read it once. Then again, incredibly proud to see this. Some people are just destined for greatness. Wishing her all the best on this incredible journey. We had our time, and I'll always be grateful for it. She deserves every bit of this. Clara stared at the screen for a long time. Then she set her phone face down on the cutting table. She picked up her fabric shears. She went back to work. But the story wasn't finished yet. Because 3 weeks after the cover dropped, at a Fashion Week event, Clara attended not as a guest or a buyer or a background figure, but as an honoree. The CFDA had fast-tracked a recognition, award for emerging designers, and her name was on the list. She walked into a room full of the most powerful people in fashion, and Marcus Hale was there. She didn't see him immediately. She was talking to Gwen, laughing at something the silver-haired woman had said, wearing a deep green suit of her own, construction that had taken 30 hours to make, and fit her like it had been born with her. She was fully, completely present. And then she felt it. That particular sensation of being watched by someone who knows you in a way that goes beneath the surface. She turned her head. He was standing near the bar. He looked the same, perhaps slightly older, slightly heavier in the face. He was with a woman Clara didn't recognize, who was pretty and polished, and held her champagne glass with the practiced ease of someone who attended many events like this one. Their eyes met. Marcus went pale. Not slightly, pale. The blood left his face the way it leaves someone who has been confronted by something they cannot rationalize away. He had seen the cover. He had seen the articles. He had written that Instagram caption, that careful, public, face-saving caption, and perhaps he had told himself that was enough. That it was generous of him. That it closed the account cleanly, but accounts like the one he owed Clara Mendez do not close with an Instagram caption. He crossed the room. Of course he did. Clara watched him come and felt. She would reflect on this later with something like wonder, almost nothing. Not rage, not hurt, not the desperate need for him to understand what he had done. Just a clear, calm stillness. The way the surface of deep water is still even when the ocean floor is moving. Clara, he stopped in front of her. His voice was doing something complicated, trying to be warm, trying to be casual, strangled by the sheer impossibility of the moment. You look, he paused, shook his head. You look incredible. She smiled. Politely. The way you smile at someone you once knew in another life. Thank you, Marcus. I saw the cover, he said. Obviously. Everyone saw the cover. A short laugh, hollow at the edges. I always knew you were talented. I hope you know that. I always believed in your... Marcus. Her voice was gentle but absolute. A door closing. You don't need to do this. He stopped. I mean that kindly, she said. I genuinely do. You don't owe me a speech, and I don't need one. What happened between us is over. It's been over. And I think we both know that whatever you're trying to say right now is more for you than it is for me. He opened his mouth, closed it. I'm not angry, she continued. I want you to hear that. I spent a long time being angry, and then a longer time being sad, and then I went to work. That's it. That's the whole story. She tilted her head slightly. But I do want to say one thing. And I want you to really hear it. He nodded. Something in his eyes had broken open. Something genuine. Finally, beneath all the rehearsed composure, the woman you said had let herself go, Clara said quietly, was grieving. She was grieving a miscarriage we never talked about, and a marriage that was dying, and a version of herself she was losing, piece by piece trying to hold on to someone who had already decided she wasn't enough. She wasn't letting herself go. She was drowning. And instead of reaching for her, you walked away and told yourself she wasn't worth saving. She paused. Let that settle. I'm telling you this not to hurt you. I'm telling you because I think somewhere in you, you knew it then. And I think that's what you're actually carrying right now. Marcus Hale, heir to a Connecticut real estate fortune, educated at the finest schools, polished and practiced and perfectly assembled, stood in front of her, with his eyes full of something that looked, for the first time she could remember, like genuine reckoning. "I'm sorry, Clara," he said, and this time it sounded real. Stripped of performance. Just 2 words dropped like stones. She nodded. "I know," she said simply, and then she turned back to Gwen, back to the room, back to the life she had built from a moving receipt and a sewing machine on a bare apartment floor, and she did not look back. Not because she was cruel, but because she was free. The memoir came out 18 months later. The cover was simple. Clara in her own clothes, standing in the Newark apartment where it had all started. The sewing machine was in the frame, the east-facing window, the light. The book was called Made from Scratch. The same words that had been on the Vogue cover, because they were the truest words she knew for what she was, for what she had done, for what she wanted. Every woman who had ever been made to feel invisible to understand was possible. It spent 14 weeks on the bestseller list. In the acknowledgments, she thanked her mother, the seamstress, her father, the janitor, her sister, the Brooklyn photographer who had passed a link to a magazine editor, and Gwen Park, who had looked at her work and seen what it truly was. She did not mention Marcus, not because she hadn't forgiven him, she had, but because some people are not the story. Some people are only the reason the story begins. There is something that Clara said in an interview, months after all of it, after the cover and the award and the memoir and the fashion houses, and the morning shows, that stayed with me long after I read it. The interviewer had asked her what she would say to the version of herself sitting on that bare apartment floor in November. Sewing machine in its case, everything lost, and Clara thought about it for a moment. And then she said, "I would tell her that the floor is not the end. The floor is where you find out what you're actually made of. Most people never hit the floor, and so they never know. But you will find out, and what you find is going to surprise you, because you were never who he said you were. You were always who you actually are. The work will show you. Just start. Just begin. The rest will come." She was right. The rest did come. Not because the world is fair. Not because hard work always wins. Not because there is some cosmic justice that balances every cruelty with an equal reward. But because Clara Mendez, on the floor of an empty apartment in November, made a single irreversible decision. She chose herself. Completely and without condition. And from that choice, just that one choice, everything else became possible. That is the whole story, and it is enough. If this story moved you, if some part of Clara's journey touched something in your own, leave a comment below. Tell me what part hit you hardest. Tell me where you're watching from. And if you know someone who needs to hear this story right now, share it with them. Not because it's content, but because sometimes the right words at the right moment are the only thing that stands between someone and the floor. This is Voice and Tales. We'll see you in the next one.